The calling. Ethan Walker never believed in destiny. He was just an ordinary guy living an ordinary life. His days were filled with routine. Wake up, go to work, come home, and repeat. Nothing exciting ever happened to him. But that changed the night he heard the voice. It started as a whisper in his mind. Ethan, wake up. His eyes snapped open. His room was dark, and everything was quiet. He sat up, his heart pounding. Had he imagined it? He rubbed his temples and looked around. The clock on his nightstand blinked 3:07 a.m. Maybe it was just a dream. He lay back down and closed his eyes. Find the crystal. It's waiting for you. The voice was clearer this time. It was soft but powerful, like a command that could not be ignored. Ethan shot up again, his breath quick. Someone was speaking inside his head. He turned on the lamp, scanning the room. Hello, he whispered, feeling ridiculous. He was alone. The voice was impossible. It couldn't be real. But deep inside, he felt something pulling him. A strange energy. A need to move. Against all logic, he got up, pulled on a jacket, and stepped outside. The cold night air sent a shiver down his spine. The streets were empty. Only the sound of distant cars filled the silence. Go to the forest. Ethan hesitated. The forest was just outside town. It wasn't far, but why would he go there in the middle of the night? Trust me. The voice was calm, but there was urgency in it now. Ethan didn't know why, but he started walking. His feet moved on their own, as if some invisible force was guiding him. As he reached the edge of the forest, the trees loomed tall and dark. The moonlight barely reached inside, but Ethan felt no fear. Instead, there was an odd sense of purpose. A few more steps. Ethan stepped onto the forest path. Dry leaves crunched under his feet. The wind whispered through the trees. Then, suddenly, a faint glow in the distance. Ethan narrowed his eyes. At first, he thought it was his imagination. But no, the glow was real. It pulsed like a heartbeat, soft and blue, coming from the ground ahead. His steps quickened. His heart pounded in his chest. And then he saw it. A small crystal, half buried in the dirt. It wasn't big, just the size of his palm. But it shimmered like liquid light. The glow reflected in his eyes as he knelt down, reaching for it. As soon as his fingers touched the crystal, the world changed. A sharp flash of light blinded him. The air crackled with energy. A powerful force wrapped around him, lifting him off the ground. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. His body felt weightless. The world around him melted away. The forest, the trees, the cold night air, everything vanished. Then, darkness. For a moment, there was nothing, just an endless void. Then Ethan opened his eyes, and he was somewhere else. A new world. He gasped, stumbling forward. His feet hit solid stone. The air was thick with the scent of something old and powerful. He was standing inside a massive temple, surrounded by towering pillars. The walls were covered in glowing symbols, shifting and changing like they were alive. The ceiling stretched so high he couldn't see the top. And in the center of the temple, standing on a raised platform, was her. A woman, but not human. She was tall, elegant, and otherworldly. Her skin shimmered like polished silver, and her eyes glowed like twin stars. Her hair flowed like liquid gold, and behind her, 6 floating rings of light hovered in perfect motion. Ethan had never seen anything like her before. She was beautiful, terrifying, powerful. She stepped forward, her gaze locked onto his. When she spoke, her voice echoed in the vast temple. You have finally come. Ethan's throat was dry. His mind raced. Whoa, where am I? He stammered. The woman's glowing eyes studied him carefully. You are in the celestial chamber, she said, and you are the one I have chosen. Ethan shook his head. Chosen? Chosen for what? Her expression was unreadable, but there was something sad in her eyes. "For a war that must be won," she said. "The war that will decide the fate of the universe." Ethan felt like the ground had disappeared beneath him. A war? The universe? What was she talking about? "I think you made a mistake," he said quickly. "I'm nobody. I'm just a guy from Earth." The woman tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear. Then she stepped closer. "No," she said softly. "You are exactly who we need." Ethan wanted to protest, to tell her she had the wrong person, but deep down, he felt it. Something inside him had already changed, and there was no turning back. The dying goddess. Ethan stood frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs. The strange, celestial woman before him, Seraphis, gazed at him with an expression he couldn't quite understand. It was a mix of relief, sorrow, and something deeper. His mind struggled to keep up. A moment ago, he was in a forest, on Earth. Now he was standing in a massive temple, surrounded by glowing symbols that seemed to breathe with life. "You have finally come," Seraphis repeated, her voice calm yet urgent. Ethan took a shaky step back. "Who? What are you?" Seraphis sighed, and the 6 golden rings behind her pulsed softly, as if responding to her emotions. "I am Seraphis, the last of my kind, the last Celestian goddess." Ethan swallowed hard. "Right, and I'm supposed to believe that." She tilted her head, studying him. Then she lifted a hand, and the air shifted. A soft golden light surrounded her palm, and suddenly, Ethan felt something inside him stirring. A vision hit him like a tidal wave. Visions of a dying world. Ethan gasped as his surroundings melted away. He was no longer in the temple. Instead, he saw a beautiful world. Floating cities, golden towers, and skies filled with shimmering constellations. A civilization far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. And then, destruction. The sky turned black. The cities crumbled. Giant warships descended from the heavens, firing energy beams that burned everything in their path. Screams. Explosions. A never-ending storm of fire and blood. He saw Seraphis standing at the top of a great palace, her hands raised toward the sky. She was trying to protect her people, but she was outnumbered, overpowered. The enemy, the Drex, were too strong. He saw their leader, General Vorkath, a monstrous being covered in dark armor, with glowing red eyes that burned with hatred. He raised his massive blade, and with one strike, the palace fell. The vision shattered, and Ethan collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. He was back in the temple, his body shaking. What was that?" he whispered. Seraphis lowered her hand. "That was my home," she said softly. "That was my people." Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead. "They're all gone." She nodded. "I am the last. The only survivor." Ethan sat back, trying to process what he had just seen. "And you brought me here. Why?" Seraphis's eyes glowed brighter. "Because the war is not over," she said. "The Drex have won many battles, but the final battle has not yet begun." Ethan frowned. "And what does that have to do with me?" Seraphis took a deep breath. "You were chosen, Ethan. Not by chance, but by destiny." He let out a dry laugh. "Yeah. No, you've got the wrong guy. I'm not a warrior. I'm not even special. I'm just some normal guy from Earth." Seraphis stepped closer, and when she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "No, Ethan," she said. "You are the last hope of 2 worlds. A mission with no escape." Ethan shook his head. "No, no way. You need a fighter, a soldier, not me." Seraphis studied him carefully. "Do you think I summoned you without reason?" He opened his mouth to argue, but the look in her glowing eyes made him stop. "Ethan, your world, Earth, is next," she said. His breath caught in his throat. "What?" "The Drex do not stop," Seraphis continued. They consume, conquer, erase. She waved a hand, and suddenly, another vision filled Ethan's mind. This time, he saw Earth, but not as it was. It was burning. Massive Drek warships hovered over the ruins of cities. Soldiers marched through the streets, crushing resistance under their boots. Skyscrapers lay in rubble. And among the wreckage, he saw himself, lying on the ground, motionless. Ethan jolted back to reality, gasping. His hands were shaking. Seraphis's voice was gentle. If you do nothing, your world will fall, just like mine did. Ethan felt anger rising in his chest. Then why not warn Earth? Why not tell people to prepare? Seraphis sighed. Even if they believed me, they would not be ready. The Dreks are too advanced, too ruthless. The last soldiers. Pain. It surged through Ethan's body like wildfire, burning every nerve, twisting every muscle. He screamed, but no sound came out. His vision blurred as a golden light wrapped around him, pouring into his skin, his bones, his very soul. Seraphis was transferring her power, a power far beyond human understanding. His mind shattered into a million pieces, memories that weren't his flashed before his eyes. He saw battles fought in the stars, ancient warriors wielding energy beyond science, civilizations rising and falling like dust in the wind. Then, darkness. For a moment, there was nothing. And then he woke up. A new power, a new war. Ethan gasped, his chest heaving for air. The floor beneath him was cold, smooth stone. His entire body ached, but something was different. The weakness he had always known, the sluggishness of being human, was gone. He felt stronger, faster, different. Seraphis stood before him, her body dim, her once brilliant glow now flickering like a candle in the wind. "It is done," she said softly. Ethan sat up, clutching his head. What did you do to me?" Seraphis gave him a weak smile. "I gave you what remains of my strength. My time is short now. But you, Ethan, you are ready." He shook his head. He didn't feel ready. His body was buzzing with an energy he couldn't control. His heartbeat echoed in his ears, like it belonged to something more than human. Then the ground shook beneath him. A deep, rumbling tremor rolled through the temple. Dust fell from the high ceiling. A distant boom thundered outside. Seraphis's face darkened. "They found us." Ethan scrambled to his feet. "Who?" "The Dreks," she whispered. "They know you are here." Another explosion rocked the temple. A high-pitched screeching noise filled the air, a sound that made Ethan's blood turn cold. Seraphis turned to him. "You must go. Now. But what about you?" She gave him a sad smile. "I have done my part." Ethan didn't like that answer. But before he could argue, the ceiling cracked above them. A massive chunk of stone collapsed, crashing down. Seraphis raised her hand. A final burst of golden energy held the rubble midair. "Go," she commanded. Ethan clenched his fists. His instincts told him to stay, to fight. But he knew this was not his battle to win. Not yet. He turned and ran. The last survivors. Ethan sprinted through the massive temple doors, bursting into the open world beyond. And what he saw stole his breath away. He stood on the edge of a city, not a normal city, but a place of floating structures, connected by glowing bridges of energy. The sky was deep violet, filled with distant stars and towering spires that shimmered like glass. But the city was dying. Fires burned in the distance. The streets were cracked, abandoned. Strange alien statues lay shattered. And above it all, they were coming. Massive black ships descended from the sky, their metal hulls lined with pulsing red veins. The Drek warships. Ethan barely had time to react before something moved in the shadows. A figure leaped at him, a blade flashing. Tilang. A second figure blocked the attack, their sword meeting the first with a burst of white sparks. Ethan stumbled back, watching the fight unfold before him. The attacker was a Drek soldier, a hulking creature covered in black armor, its eyes glowing like burning embers. But the one who saved him wasn't human either. He was tall, muscular, with silver-gray skin and piercing blue eyes. His armor was sleek, made of some glowing metal, and his movements were lightning fast. With one powerful strike, he sliced through the Drek's chest. The creature let out a horrible shriek before collapsing into a heap. The warrior turned to Ethan. "You must be the human." Ethan blinked. "But yeah." The warrior studied him, then nodded. "Come with me." Before Ethan could respond, more Drek soldiers landed nearby. The warrior grabbed Ethan by the arm and pulled him into the shadows. Ralzek and the resistance. Ethan was dragged through the ruins, dodging falling debris and streaks of red laser fire. The warrior led him through a narrow passage, then into an underground chamber hidden beneath the city. A group of figures stood waiting. More Celestians. There were only a few dozen left, some injured, some holding weapons, all with the same exhausted look. The warrior turned to Ethan. "I am Ralzek," he said, "commander of the last Celestian warriors." Ethan took a deep breath. "So you're the resistance." Ralzek frowned. "We are what's left of it." Ethan looked around, taking in the scene. These people were the last survivors of an ancient race. They had lost everything. And now, they were looking at him, like he was their last hope. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Listen, I think there's been a mistake. I'm not a warrior. I don't even know how to fight." Ralzek studied him for a long moment. "You wear the mark of the goddess," he said. "You carry her power." Ethan frowned. "Yeah, but that doesn't mean." "Then prove it." Before Ethan could react, Ralzek lunged at him. Ethan's instincts kicked in, but they weren't his. He moved faster than he ever had before. Ralzek's blade slashed through the air, but Ethan's hand shot up and blocked it with his bare arm. A pulse of golden energy erupted from his skin, knocking Ralzek backward. Silence filled the room. Ralzek picked himself up, staring at Ethan. "Imph," he said. "Maybe you are more than you seem." Ethan stared at his own hands, heart pounding. What just happened? Ralzek gave a grim smile. "Tomorrow, we see if you can survive training." Ethan swallowed. "Training?" Ralzek's expression darkened. "If you want to defeat the Dreks, human," he said, "then you must learn to kill them." Ethan's heart sank. There was no turning back. The betrayal. Ethan stood in the middle of the training arena, breathing heavily. His muscles burned, his vision blurred, and his entire body screamed for rest. But Ralzek wasn't slowing down. Again, the Celestian warrior barked, tossing Ethan a blade. Ethan barely caught it before Ralzek charged at him, his own weapon a blur of silver and blue energy. Ethan's instincts kicked in. He dodged left, barely avoiding the strike. His grip on the blade tightened, and without thinking, he countered with a swing of his own. Ralzek parried it effortlessly. With a flick of his wrist, he sent Ethan sprawling to the ground. Ethan groaned, rolling onto his back. The stone floor was cold and unforgiving, much like Ralzek himself. "You hesitate," Ralzek said, standing over him. Again. Ethan pushed himself up, wiping the sweat from his brow. It had been 3 days since he arrived at the Celestian hideout. 3 days since Seraphis gave him her power. 3 days of non-stop training, and he was still getting his ass kicked. "Maybe," Ethan panted, "if you actually explained how to use this power, I wouldn't keep getting thrown around like a ragdoll." Ralzek's glowing blue eyes narrowed. Power is worthless without control. Ethan exhaled, frustrated. "Yeah, well, I don't exactly have a manual for this." The training hall was silent for a moment. The other Celestian warriors, what few of them remained, watched from the sidelines. Some whispered doubts about him. "He is not one of us. How can a human lead a war?" Seraphis must have made a mistake. Ethan clenched his jaw. He knew what they were thinking. He didn't belong here. He wasn't Celestian. He wasn't a warrior. But what choice did he have? Ralzek sighed. Enough for today. Get some rest. Ethan exhaled in relief and walked off. But before he could leave, Ralzek spoke again. You may not see it now, he said, but power without discipline is a curse. Control yourself, or you will destroy yourself. Ethan didn't answer. He just kept walking. Secrets in the dark. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The weight of everything pressed down on him. Seraphis's death, the war, Earth's looming destruction. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw visions of the Drex burning his home. He sighed and got up. Maybe a walk would clear his head. The Celestian base was built beneath the ruins of an ancient city. It was a maze of tunnels, lit by glowing blue orbs that flickered like candlelight. The air was cool, and the silence was almost comforting. But then he heard voices. Ethan slowed his steps, pressing himself against a stone pillar. You said he wouldn't survive the training, a low voice whispered. Ethan held his breath. A second voice. Ralzek. I said he wasn't ready. That is different. A pause. Then the first voice spoke again. He carries the power of Seraphis. We should be using him, not training him. Ethan's heart pounded. Using him. Ralzek exhaled sharply. He is not a weapon. He is a person. The other voice scoffed. You're too sentimental. When the time comes, I wonder, will you choose him? Or your people? Footsteps echoed down the hall as the voices faded. Ethan stayed hidden, his mind racing. Ralzek didn't trust him. Some of the Celestians wanted to use him. And worst of all, he was truly alone in this. The spy. The next morning, Ethan tried to push the conversation out of his mind. He had bigger things to worry about, like not dying in training. But before he could step into the arena, an alarm blared through the base. Red lights flashed. A warning siren howled. Ralzek stormed into the hall, his face like stone. Drex scouts are inside the base. Ethan grabbed his blade. Where? Close. Ethan followed the warriors through the tunnels, adrenaline pumping through his veins. They turned a corner and a dead Celestian soldier lay on the floor, a dark Drek blade buried in his chest. Ethan swallowed hard. Damn. Ralzek crouched beside the body. His jaw tightened. This wasn't a simple scout attack. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? Ralzek looked up, his eyes cold. The only way they could have gotten in. He hesitated, then said the word that made Ethan's stomach drop. As if someone let them in. A traitor. Ethan's pulse quickened. Someone inside the Celestian base was working with the Drex. But who? And why? A truth revealed. That night, Ethan couldn't ignore what he heard in the tunnels anymore. Ralzek's hesitation. The talk of using him. The fact that someone inside their base had betrayed them. He had to know the truth. So he waited. Late at night, when the halls were empty, he followed Ralzek. The commander walked through the tunnels, moving with purpose. Ethan kept his distance, heart pounding. Then Ralzek turned a corner and disappeared into a secret chamber. Ethan crept forward. He pressed his ear to the stone door. And what he heard changed everything. The human cannot know. Ethan's body went cold. Ralzek's voice answered. If he finds out what Seraphis hid from him, we will lose him. The first voice scoffed. So we keep lying. He thinks he can save Earth. But the truth, a pause. Then, the truth is that Earth is already lost. Ethan's breath stopped. Earth was already lost. His hands curled into fists. He wanted to burst through the door, demand answers. But he didn't. Because now he finally understood. The Celestians weren't telling him everything. They were keeping secrets. And whatever those secrets were, they changed everything. The last war begins. Ethan's hands trembled as he sat alone in the darkened chamber, his mind spinning with the words he had overheard. The truth is that Earth is already lost. The words rang inside his skull, louder than the war drums of the Drex. Had Seraphis known? Had she lied to him before she died? Or had the Celestians simply given up? A storm of emotions crashed inside him. Anger, fear, betrayal. He had spent days training, fighting, bleeding for this war. He had risked everything, believing he was fighting for the survival of Earth. But now, if Earth was already doomed, what was the point? His fists clenched. He needed answers. But before he could act, the alarms began to scream. The Drek invasion begins. The Celestian base shook violently, dust and debris falling from the ceilings. Red emergency lights flashed in every corridor, and the echoes of distant explosions rumbled through the underground tunnels. Ethan sprinted through the chaos, pushing past Celestian soldiers as they rushed toward the war chambers. Ralzek was already there, standing over a massive holographic war map of the battlefield above. His expression was grim. "They've come," he said, his voice sharp. Ethan stepped forward. "How many?" Ralzek's jaw tightened. "All of them." The hologram flickered, revealing an armada of Drek warships descending from the sky. The ground trembled as the first waves of drop pods smashed into the planet's surface, unleashing thousands of Drek warriors onto the battlefield. The final battle had begun. Ethan took a breath. "What's the plan?" Ralzek's blue eyes met his. "We fight. The battle for Celestia." The moment Ethan stepped onto the battlefield, the sky burned. Drek warships hovered overhead like dark gods, their cannons raining fire and destruction onto the ruins of the Celestian city. The air was thick with smoke, the smell of burning metal and blood choking his lungs. Celestian warriors rushed past him, weapons glowing as they charged into battle. The fight was already brutal. Energy blasts streaked across the sky. Drek soldiers clashed with Celestians in savage melee combat, and explosions shattered entire buildings. Ralzek led the charge, cutting through the enemy with unmatched precision. Ethan gripped his blade. His heart pounded. Then a Drek warrior lunged at him. It was massive, twice his size, armored like a walking tank. Its red eyes burned with hatred as it swung its blade toward Ethan's head. But Ethan moved before he could think. His body reacted on its own, faster than humanly possible. He dodged left, the blade missing him by inches. With a swift motion, he countered. His weapon slashed through the Drek's armor, sending it crashing to the ground. A pulse of golden energy flickered across his skin. The power of Seraphis. He was finally using it. But there was no time to stop. More Dreks came, their guttural war cries shaking the air. And so Ethan fought. The arrival of General Vorkath. For hours, the battle raged. Ethan had never felt so alive, so powerful. He moved through the battlefield like a storm, dodging attacks, cutting down enemies, leading Celestians into battle. But then, the sky split apart. A massive Drek warship descended, blotting out the sun. A single figure leaped from its hull, landing in the middle of the battlefield with a deafening boom. The ground cracked beneath him. The Celestians froze in fear. Ethan felt it instantly, the sheer, overwhelming presence of the enemy commander, General Vorkath. His armor was black as the void, his eyes glowing with pure, seething hatred. A massive sword, jagged and pulsing with dark energy, rested in his clawed hands. Vorkath raised his blade, his deep voice booming across the battlefield. "Celestians, your time is over. Your goddess is dead. And now, your last hope dies with you." His words were like poison. Ethan felt the morale of the Celestians shatter. They had fought bravely, but now they stood against the unstoppable force that had already destroyed their world once before. Fear crept into Ethan's heart. But then, Vorkath's red eyes landed on him, and he smiled. So, the human lives. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. Vorkath raised his sword toward him. "Come, chosen one, let us end this war." The duel begins. Silence fell over the battlefield. Ethan's grip tightened on his blade. His breath was ragged. This was it. He had spent days training for this moment. He had survived the pain, the battles, the betrayals, all leading to this fight. And yet, standing before Vorkath, he felt like a mouse before a lion. The Drek warlord charged. Ethan barely had time to react before Vorkath's blade slammed against his own, sending shockwaves through the ground. The impact nearly shattered his arms. The sheer power behind each of Vorkath's attacks was overwhelming. It was like fighting a living storm, a force of nature that couldn't be stopped. Ethan dodged, parried, countered, but he was too slow. Vorkath was faster, stronger, deadlier. With a swift strike, Vorkath's sword slashed across Ethan's chest. Pain exploded in his body. He stumbled back, blood dripping onto the scorched ground. Vorkath chuckled. "You are not ready, human." Ethan gritted his teeth, his vision blurring. He felt his strength fading. Was this it? Was this how it ended? Then, something inside him snapped. The power of Seraphis ignited. Golden energy erupted from his body, his wounds sealing instantly. His eyes burned with celestial light. Vorkath's smile faded. Ethan clenched his fists. His voice was steady. "I don't care if Earth is lost. I don't care if you're stronger than me." He raised his blade. "I'm not fighting for a prophecy. I'm not fighting because I was chosen." His energy flared like a supernova. "I'm fighting because I choose to." Vorkath's red eyes narrowed. So be it. The battlefield erupted as they clashed again. The rise of a human warrior. The battlefield shook as Ethan and Vorkath clashed, their weapons crackling with energy. Every strike sent shockwaves through the air, shattering stone, tearing through what little remained of the Celestian ruins. Ethan had never felt power like this, the energy of Seraphis flowing through his veins, making him faster, stronger, deadlier. But still, Vorkath was more. The Drek warlord was a monster of pure destruction. Every movement was precise, brutal, and overwhelming. His massive blade carved through the air like a hurricane of steel. Ethan barely dodged an attack that could have split him in half. Vorkath's glowing red eyes burned with amusement. "You fight well, human." His voice was like thunder. "But you do not fight to win." Ethan gritted his teeth, panting. "And what the hell do you think I'm fighting for?" Vorkath swung his sword down with brutal force. Ethan barely blocked it, but the impact drove him to his knees. "You fight to survive," Vorkath growled. "That is why you will lose." Ethan felt his arms trembling. The weight of Vorkath's blade was crushing him. And then, a vision hit him. The truth of Seraphis' power. Ethan wasn't on the battlefield anymore. He was somewhere else. A deep, endless void surrounded him, filled with golden light. And standing before him was Seraphis. She was different now, her form flickering, fading like a dying flame. "Ethan," she whispered. His heart pounded. "Seraphis, what's happening?" Her glowing eyes met his. "The power I gave you, it is not meant to last." Ethan felt his stomach drop. "What?" "The power of a Celestian cannot exist in a mortal body forever." She stepped closer. "You are burning away, Ethan. Every time you fight, every time you push yourself, you are coming closer to the end." Ethan clenched his fists. "So what? Are you saying I'm gonna die no matter what?" Seraphis didn't answer. But she didn't need to. He understood. His life was the price of the power he wielded. He had only one fight left. And when it was over, he would not survive. Ethan closed his eyes. Then he smiled. "I don't care." Seraphis' eyes widened. "I'm not fighting to survive," Ethan said. "I'm fighting to win." Seraphis' form flickered, and for the first time she smiled. "Then fight, chosen one, and make it count." The warrior awakens. Ethan's eyes snapped open. He was back on the battlefield, Vorkath still pressing his blade down on him. But something was different now. Ethan stopped resisting. Instead, He let the power of Seraphis explode from his body. A golden shockwave blasted outward, sending Vorketh flying backward. The battlefield fell silent. The Celestians, the Drex, they all stopped fighting. Ethan stood up. His entire body was glowing, pulsing with raw celestial energy. The ground beneath him cracked from the sheer force of it. Vorketh rose to his feet, his red eyes narrowed. "So, you finally understand." Ethan raised his sword. He wasn't afraid anymore. "I understand one thing, Vorketh." His voice was steady, filled with unshakable determination. "You lose today." Vorketh let out a roar of fury. And then, the final battle began. The duel that shook the stars. Ethan and Vorketh clashed again, but this time, it was different. Ethan was no longer barely surviving. He was matching Vorketh blow for blow. Their weapons collided with blinding force, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. Energy ripped through the air, tearing through structures, shattering what remained of the Celestian city. Ethan's strikes were faster, stronger, unstoppable. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just fighting. He was winning. Vorketh let out a furious snarl, lunging forward with a devastating strike. Ethan dodged, and in one perfect motion, he drove his blade straight through Vorketh's chest. Time froze. Vorketh staggered. His glowing red eyes flickered. The battlefield was silent. Ethan pulled his blade free, stepping back. Vorketh dropped to his knees. His breath was ragged, strained. Blood, black and thick, dripped from his wound. He looked up at Ethan, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a twisted smile crept across his face. "You are no mortal." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "I'm not a god either." Vorketh let out a final laugh. Then his body collapsed, motionless. The Drek army stood frozen in horror. And then, they ran. The entire Drek fleet began to retreat. Their warships pulled away from the planet. Their warriors fled in terror. The war was over. Ethan had won. The price of victory. Ethan felt his legs give out. His vision blurred. His body shook violently. Ralzek was suddenly beside him, catching him before he fell. "Ethan," he shouted, "stay awake." Ethan tried to speak, but he couldn't. His body was fading. The energy inside him, the power of Seraphis, was finally burning out. This was it. He had known the price, and he had no regrets. Ralzek's face twisted with grief. "No, there must be a way to." Ethan gave him a weak smile. "Take care of them," he whispered. "They need you now." Ralzek clenched his jaw, his eyes burning. And then, Ethan's vision went black. The final choice. Darkness. Ethan felt nothing. No pain. No fear. No weight of battle pressing against his shoulders. For the first time, in what felt like an eternity, there was only silence. Was this what death felt like? Then, a voice. Soft. Familiar. Ancient. "Wake up, Ethan." His eyes snapped open. And he wasn't dead. The edge of existence. Ethan found himself standing in a place beyond reality. The air shimmered with golden light, stretching into a vast, endless horizon. Stars pulsed in the distance, swirling like a cosmic ocean. He turned, and there, standing before him, was Seraphis. But she was different now. No longer weak, no longer fading. She stood tall, radiant, and whole, her golden eyes shimmering like burning suns. The celestial rings behind her spun in perfect motion. Ethan swallowed. "Am I dead?" Seraphis gave him a soft, knowing smile. "Not yet." He exhaled sharply. "Well, that's new." Seraphis stepped closer. "You did it, Ethan. You defeated Vorketh. You ended the war." Ethan let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, and now I'm supposed to just fade away, right?" Seraphis was silent. Ethan clenched his fists. "That's what you told me. That my body couldn't handle your power forever. He exhaled. I knew the price. I accepted it. Seraphis nodded. Yes, but there is something I did not tell you. Ethan froze. What? Seraphis extended her hand, and suddenly, a vision exploded in his mind. A truth long hidden. The vision took him back to Earth. But it was not burning. It was alive. Cities stood tall, untouched by war. People walked the streets, unaware of the battle Ethan had just fought. Ethan's breath hitched. It's not destroyed. Seraphis nodded. No, Ethan. Earth was never lost. Rage flooded through him. He turned on her, his eyes blazing. You lied to me. Seraphis met his gaze without flinching. I did. Ethan's hands trembled. You and Ralzek, you let me think Earth was doomed. You let me believe I was fighting for a lost cause. Seraphis sighed. Ethan, if I had told you Earth was safe, would you have stayed? Would you have fought? Ethan opened his mouth. But no words came. Because she was right. If he had known Earth was never in danger, he would have done everything to go home. But now everything had changed. He had fought. He had bled. He had become something else. Something more. Ethan swallowed, his voice quiet. So I was just a tool. Seraphis shook her head. No, Ethan. You were a savior. The weight of her words settled over him. He had saved a world. Maybe not his world, but a world nonetheless. The final choice. Seraphis lifted her hand, and suddenly, 2 portals appeared. One pulsed with soft blue energy, showing glimpses of Earth, his home, his past, his life before all of this. The other shimmered with golden light, revealing the ruins of the Celestian city. The people he had fought beside. The warriors who had followed him into battle. Seraphis met his eyes. You have a choice, Ethan. His heart pounded. One path takes you home, back to Earth, back to your old life. She gestured to the other. The other leads you to Celestia, a world without its goddess, a world that still needs a protector. Ethan stared at both portals. His chest ached at the sight of Earth, his apartment, his street, the life he had left behind. But then he looked at the Celestian ruins, the warriors rebuilding their world, the people mourning their dead, the life he had helped save. He had fought for them, bled for them. Could he just walk away? Ethan exhaled. If I go home, what happens here? Seraphis was quiet. They will rebuild. But without guidance, without leadership, they may fall into chaos. Ethan swallowed hard. And if I stay? Seraphis tilted her head. Then you will lead them, train them, protect them. You will become their guardian. Ethan's mind raced. He thought of Ralzek, the hardened warrior who had fought beside him, who had doubted him, who had finally accepted him. He thought of the Celestians, the last survivors of a fallen empire. He thought of Earth, the world that didn't even know what he had done, a world that didn't need him. His fingers curled into a fist. And then he made his choice, a warrior's legacy. Seraphis watched as Ethan stepped forward, not toward the portal to Earth, but toward Celestia. She smiled. I thought you would choose this path. Ethan gave a small smirk. Yeah. Then why give me the choice at all? Because you deserve to make it, she said softly. Ethan nodded. He took a deep breath and stepped through the golden portal. The world shifted around him. And when he opened his eyes, he was back on Celestia. 1 year later, the city of Celestia was no longer in ruins. Where once there was destruction, now stood hope. Ethan walked through the city, his armor gleaming under the twin suns. Celestian warriors trained in the courtyards, preparing for whatever threats the universe still held. A new age had begun. Ralzek approached him, a smirk on his face. So, human, still wish you had gone home. Ethan chuckled. Nah, I think I'm right where I need to be. Ralzek crossed his arms. Good, Because we just got word of a new enemy rising beyond the stars. Ethan exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Of course we did. He looked up at the sky, at the endless unknown. The war was over. But the battle for the future was just beginning. Epilogue. A message to Earth. Across the galaxy, far beyond Celestia, a small device landed on Earth. A message waiting to be opened. And when it was, a voice echoed through the world. We are not alone. And one day, the war will come to you.